Hi, I'm Kochuk Maria and I'm from Ukraine. Today I would like to tell you about my project on the topic quality of AESCULUS Hippocastanum of pollen growing in Lutsk areas with various degrees of air pollution. But before that, let's look at this video by Studio Lutsk. It's the city where I live, and the city is far from being the largest city in Ukraine. In any case, there are no landfills, factories, but at the same time, environmentalists are demonstrating the results of a study where air quality is declining. The level of air pollution in Lutsk is higher than the average level of air pollution in Ukraine. The index of air pollution in Lutsk in 2018 was 10.49. In 2017, it was 9.42. Environmentalists denote the fluctuation in the number of air emission in Lutsk in recent years with a tendency to increase. So, in 2018, the average annual concentration of formaldehyde, nitrogen dioxide, and phenol exceeds the TLV 3.13, 2.37, and 1.83 times respectively. I wouldn't like my city to become as polluted as giant cities like Delhi, Hanoi, Mexico City, and Kiev after all. So I started studying air quality and monitoring it. I found that today research related to assessing the state of urban areas filled with various sources of pollution use plants from industrial zones and the urban environment. Supplementing the objective information of chemical and physicochemical control with biomonitoring data can bring us closer to an adequate assessment of the environmental situation in the modern city and its ecological zoning. Pollen grains of woody and herbaceous plants can be used as bioindicators. It is known that the processes of pollen formation and development are sensitive to the influence of factors of different etiology. In conditions of ecological distress, plants produce a large number of teratomorphic and sterile pollen grains. By studying the morphological features of pollen grains, it is possible not only to establish the presence of contaminants in the environment, but also to provide a comparative assessment of pollution of different regions and individual zones within one region. The purpose of the work is to evaluate the quality of pollen grains of Aesculus hippocastanum of ordinary districts of Lutsk with different degrees of air pollution. Based on the goals, the following tasks were studied in work: to estimate the frequency of sterile and teratomorphic pollen of Aesculus hippocastanum in the areas of Lutsk with different degrees of pollution, estimate the diameter of pollen grains of the plants studied. The object of the research is the quality of pollen grades of Aesculus hippocastanum trees, which grow in relatively clean and contaminated areas of Lutsk. The subject of the research is biomonitoring of the ecological condition of the atmospheric air in Lutsk. Research methods. Methods of working with literature sources, determining fertility, teratomorphism, and pollen diameter, and statistical data processing methods. Scientific novelty. For the first time, the quality of Aesculus hippocastanum grains was assessed on different levels of air pollution in Lutsk. Practical significance. The quality assessment of Aesculus hippocastanum pollen grains on different air pollution levels in Lutsk has been assessed. Flowers with major pollen were collected in 2018, during the period of mass flowering of nuts in the areas of Lutsk which differed in the level of traffic. Thus, according to the literature data, which are based on observation of traffic intensity in Lutsk, there are three main categories of streets according to the level of air pollution, with very high, high, and moderate pollution. We collected pollen from at least 3 pounds per variant street. After drying, the pollen made an average sample according to the guidelines. Pollen fertility was determined in the Laboratory of Genetics and Selection of the Biological Faculty of Lesya Ukrainka National University. In pollenological studies, pollen fertility is determined by acetylcarmine staining. The test pollen is sewn on a glass slide and a drop of acetylcarmine is applied, covered with a cover glass, and after 3 to 5 minutes examined under microscope. The nuclei of fertile pollen grains are stained with acetylcarmine in dark red and the cytoplasm in pink. Sterile pollen is mostly not stained and also differs in shape and size. Pollen of large duodenism and small dwarfism size was considered teratomorphic. The results of the study calculated the sterility index SI, which is a value that shows how many times the frequency of the induced level of sterility is higher than the level of spontaneous sterility in control. Pollen grains of much larger gigantism and small dwarfing size were considered terratomorphic. The highest frequency of terratomorphic pollen grains was found in chestnut trees growing on the street Trilinska compared with the control. According to the sum of sterile and terratomorphic pollen grains, the highest percentage of anomalies was found in chestnut trees growing along the street Trilinska more than 15% and Folia Avenue over 14%. Of the 6 channel samples in which diameter of the pollen grains was determined, one sample had a significantly smaller diameter, and 2 found a significantly larger variance in pollen diameter. Our result confirmed a relationship between the level of air pollution and the proportion of abnormal pollen of plants that grow at different levels of pollution. Thus, the total proportion of abnormal channel pollen markedly coincides with the level of air pollution. The percentage of the amount of abnormal channel pollen corresponds to the level of air pollution and can be used as a discriminatory parameter for assessing the state of atmospheric air. According to the combined data on pollen sterility and terratomorphism, the most contaminated areas were Rivninska Street, Volya Avenue, and Gushet Street, more than 10% of abnormal pollen. Conclusions. The sterility of pollen of A.E.SCULUS Hippocastanum trees growing along the street with high and moderate levels of pollution was significantly higher than the sterility of pollen in control. The highest sterility of pollen was found in the trees growing along Wally Ave, Rivninska Street, and the street Glushets. The percentage of abnormal A.E.SCULUS Hippocastanum pollen corresponds to the level of air pollution and can be used as a discriminatory parameter for assessing the state of atmospheric air. Of the 6 samples of A.E.SCULUS Hippocastanum in which the diameter of pollen grains was determined, one had a significantly smaller diameter and the other 2 were characterized with substantially larger dispersion in pollen diameter. The most polluted, according to the combined data on sterility and terratomorphism of pollen, were the areas of Rivninska Street, Wally Avenue, and Glushets Street. Appealing to the results of the research, we recommend to supply the objective information of chemical and physico-chemical control of atmospheric air in urban environments. We propose to use biomonitoring data of pollen grains of A.E.SCULUS Hippocastanum, which can bring us closer to an adequate assessment of the environmental situation in our city. We recommend to include in biomonitoring not only indicators of pollen sterility, but also to study the morphological features of pollen grains, terratomorphs, which allows a comparative assessment of the pollution in different areas of the city, without resorting to the traditional method of direct registration of mutation or the use of expensive and sometimes difficult to assess equipment. The advantages of the method are the speed of execution and experiments and the possibility of screening a large volume of samples. We recommend taking measures to unload vehicles Rivninska Street, Wally Avenue, and Glushet Street, which are the most polluted according to the pollen analysis, to improve the air quality in these areas of Lutsk. I plan to continue work on the study of pollen of woody and herbaceous plants, especially in unexplored areas of the city and suburbs. I will also work on measures to curb the deterioration of environmental situation. Thank you for your attention.